Before I came on the program today, I looked at all these federal district judge decisions. There's a multiplicity of them today, as there seems to be every day. Given we're almost at 100 cases being brought by a cabal of unionists, public sector unionists, Democrat Party attorneys general, and slip and fall lawyers who are organizing and behind so much of it, because this is how they intend to lead their insurrection and undo the last election. And I want to talk about this briefly. I'm trying to think of ways to explain this so the urgency of it is understood. These are federal district judges. They get lifetime appointments. Some of them barely get voted out of the Senate, 51-50 or something of that sort. Many of them are extraordinarily radical. The judges that Biden chose were almost to a man and woman, very radical. Same with Obama. And the Clinton judges are still out there. You have some judges appointed by Republicans who are never Trumpers. It's much like the Marxists and the Islamists. They have the same ends, same means, even though they don't necessarily agree on the same ends. And as I go through these cases, I read this, and just to give you an example, let's see here if I can find this. Federal judge now has doubts about efforts to block Doge from government data. She, Chunkin of all people, just ruled that they can have access to federal data. And she would have been overruled if she said otherwise. Just a matter of time. But one after another, one has ordered the administration to put language back on websites. One has said that they have to give back a job to one particular bureaucrat with back pay. What? One said they do not support the position of the administration when it comes to transgender operations and so forth, so they put it on hold. I ask you, is this okay? And others. Federal judge reinstates employee appeals board member fired by Trump. Based on what? Federal judge issues order prohibiting massive layoffs, budget cuts at CFPB pending ruling on motion of preliminary injunction. This one, as I mentioned, judge orders HHS, CDC, and FDA. This is a Republican one. This guy Bates to restore deleted web pages with health information. Orders them to put it back. Judge questions motives of Trump's order banning transgender troops. Judge orders hearing over Trump's DOJ's bid to toss Eric Adams' corruption case. Because the judge obviously doesn't like it. Part of the Democrat cabal in there in New York. And it goes on. This is just today. So what do we have here? We have what's effectively an insurrection, a nonviolent insurrection. Call it a coup, if you wish. We have a super-legislature of unelected judges, just like the massive Communist Party operation in Communist China and other places. These people aren't elected. They're just chosen by each other. These judges are chosen by presidents. They're confirmed by the Senate. But they're not chosen by you. Their role has nothing to do with legislating. They're undermining representative government, and they're undermining the exclusive plenary power of the executive branch. Judge Chunkin today shocked me. She actually did something right. Good for her. We'll pat people on the back when they deserve it. She's the one judge today that said, no, you can have access to the data. There's nothing urgent here to stop it. And they need access to it, so they get access to it. It's like, wow. She's the only one. I just think it's too passive to call this a super unelected legislature. It's a Politburo. It's a big Politburo where these people have seized for themselves the power to make these decisions, where they have none. They have no power to make these decisions. And so they're destroying separation of powers while pretending to uphold it. They're destroying the constitutional construct while pretending to enforce it. They're substituting their own opinions, their activism, for the decisions of an elected president. Now, you don't remember this happening under Biden, right? Almost 100 lawsuits brought to do this, that, or the other. No. When Joe Biden ignored the Supreme Court, that was fine. And he did it repeatedly. Repeatedly. When he ignored federal immigration law, that was fine. He did it repeatedly. When Obama put in place DACA, which is utterly unconstitutional, other than basically one federal judge in Texas has pointed it out, perfectly fine. No big deal. Courts aren't jumping in and doing anything about it. Because when central government grows and the power of the federal government grows and the power of the courts and the bureaucracy grow, that's okay. Constitution be damned. But when you have President Trump, Musk, Doge trying to rein in its own power, the executive branch trying to raise in its own power, the executive branch trying to control the number of its own employees, because we're headed towards bankruptcy financially, and trying to straighten things out in terms of our elected government, our representative government, that is, Congress. You want to represent the people, but you can't continue to expand and empower and fund this massive Leviathan, this fourth branch of government, when we're only supposed to have three. And then you place it in the executive branch, so we now have an executive branch that's legislating without representation against the will of the man who runs the executive branch, the President of the United States. And the insurrectionists, these federal judges, the coosters, these federal judges, they're reinforcing it. Like I said, they've created a law for themselves. They have their own judges. The bureaucracy has its own judges. Ideologues, left-wing Democrat lawyers who were plucked from obscurity, whether they're professors or big-time law firm partners or whatever the hell they were, U.S. attorneys, defense lawyers, plucked from nothing, given power, and it goes to it's like a local HOA. Have you ever dealt with them, Mr. Producer? It's like a handful of morons in the neighborhood get a little bit of power and they can't control themselves. Well, the problem here is it's the federal government and it's these federal courts. John, you and I over the weekend, we also talked about this issue of a federal judge, one federal district judge. One. And Newt and I talked about this too. Issuing an order, whether it's a temporary restraining order leading to a temporary injunction, maybe leading to a permanent injunction, whatever, and applying it all over the country. So you have some schmo lawyer who becomes a judge, who's a judge in, let's say, Washington, D.C., putting out an order for the whole country. Now, that's kind of new. They're federal district judges, not federal national judges. Federal district judges. They're federal judges in the district that's been created by Congress. The federal judge has been created by Congress. The federal district has been created by Congress. And they decide on their own, you know what? I'm going to issue a temporary injunction, let's say, and apply it to every corner of the country. Wow, that's pretty damn powerful. Where's that? In any rule? Where's that in the Constitution? Nowhere. They don't have that power, but they're issuing it. Who's going to stop them? The court has to stop them, the High Court, the Supreme Court. But John Roberts is AWOL. Absolutely AWOL. I call him Hollywood John. He's so worried about how he's viewed by the media and Hollywood and all the rest. We need a Rehnquist, but unfortunately we have a Roberts. So what you are witnessing right now is a federal court insurrection, a coup of an elected president, the destruction of separation of powers and the basic authorities of the executive branch by these unelected lawyers in black robes. Unelected lawyers in black robes. And the idea that they're more righteous than the rest of us, the idea that they're more prudential or wise than the rest of us is bullcrap, is baloney. They're not. especially now when they do what they're doing? How do they expect we, the people, to have respect for them when they don't have respect for the Constitution? Why is their opinion more important to us than when we read the text of the Constitution and we understand what the Constitution says and they reject it? So we're supposed to listen to them and respect them? They're destroying their credibility. They are destroying their credibility unless the other judges in those districts, the chief judge or others, unless the appellate judges, and ultimately unless the Chief Justice and the Supreme Court fixes this, the greatest damage to our Constitution in my lifetime is being done right now. Right now. By these so-called federal district judges, many of whom should never have been near a courthouse unless they were defendants. I'm not kidding. The place for a radical leftist is not a black robe in a courtroom. That's not where those people belong. They can be advocates. They can be petitioners. But no way should they be so-called judges. There's a poison that's been let loose within the federal judiciary. A poison that's been let loose. A department can't decide what to put on its website without a federal government ordering them to put language back. Is that not the most asinine thing you've ever heard? Or they don't have access to data on some of these courts so they can conduct audits? Have you ever heard anything like this? Or they can't thin out the workforce? I mean, nobody in the private sector could function this way, let alone the federal government. It's bloated. It's out of control. There's not just waste, fraud, and abuse. There is massive sums of money going to ideological causes, massive sums of money to redistribute wealth from one group to another, having nothing to do with need or welfare. $250 billion to $500 billion a year lost, they say, or misspent. And finally, we have a president who's trying to do something about it, and the judges step in and say, no, we get to decide. Them and their 2 law clerks, or 3 law clerks, they get to decide how to run the country. Nobodies who have no knowledge, no skill set, no experience to do any of this. Except bang a wooden hammer on the table and yell order in the court.